Welcome to News, Notes, and Rumors. And with me, as always, Samantha Bunten from NBC Sports. How you doing today?
Doing well. Pretty excited to have a couple of days off for the holiday. How about you?
I am very excited. I think we're going to see some very interesting football this weekend. There's going to be several really cool games. First of all, we have some issues. And the biggest issue, I think, is the NFL officiating is getting worse. Not only are they too fat, too slow, and too old, the thing that bugs me the most is these guys don't seem to know the rules, and that is unforgivable.
Yeah, this has been a problem now for a couple of years. I think, I don't even know if I think it's any worse this year than it was last year, but that's certainly not to say it's good. I mean, in fact, it's really been quite atrocious. The rule book stuff is, I agree with you. That's really the biggest problem because there's really no excuse for not knowing the rule book. That's your entire job. If they don't see things or they make phantom calls, that's bad enough. But to not even know, what the proper call is sort of on a whole nother level.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no excuse for it. I mean, this is not that hard a deal. Now, there's a ton of rules. I understand that. But you've got to know the rules before you can begin to enforce them. And there is just no excuse for that.
Yeah, and it kind of, it doesn't really matter if there's a ton of them. If that's your job, then your job is to memorize them. It doesn't matter if there's 3 or 3,000. And it's also, I've seen the rule book. It's certainly very intense, but it's not, outside the realm of your average human's capability to memorize it. And when that's your whole gig, that's part of your job responsibility. So, I'm sure nobody wants to sit around studying an NFL rule book. Again, having looked at one is dreadfully boring and extremely nuanced in the wording. But it is what it is. It's part of the gig.
Yeah, absolutely. In St. Louis, the the current wide receiver, Stedman Bailey, was shot twice in the head. He required surgery. They are not considering this life-threatening, but being shot twice in the head is never a good idea.
Yeah, that's terrifying. This is actually the first I've heard of this. I don't know what the circumstances are surrounding this, why this happened, if they know who did it or why. But, obviously at this point, this really has nothing to do with football. Best wishes to him. Hope he recovers quickly.
It was a drive-by. He was in a car, and I think the person who was doing the shooting wanted to get the driver because he was just totally riddled with bullets. But
Wow.
this is a horrible, horrible situation. And again, it gets kind of to the point of the Johnny Manziel thing. You have to be careful who your friends are and who you're palling around with, because if they're on the shady side of the situation, that can be bad for you and your career.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I have to say, I don't think Johnny is really palling around with shady people, and I'm not sure I would put them in the same category. I think Johnny's still partying like, like 24-year-old kid who hasn't quite grown out of college is. I think his friends are basically just like everyone else, except that his problem is that he doesn't understand that his job requires him to behave differently than his hard partying friends. I don't think there's much comparison between these guys he's hanging out with, who are obviously, idiots and irresponsible, but certainly not, what it's a far cry from criminal behavior in any way. And Johnny's problem again, and this is sort of why I have problems with people saying they think he's alcoholic or he has a drug problem. He has a discipline problem. This isn't a medical issue. This isn't a chemical dependence issue. He is just too spoiled and too selfish to give up the good times and, hunker down and take his job seriously. I refuse to even give him the excuse that he's under bad influence or that he has problems or whatever. I think it's really far more lazy than it.
Well, I really do believe that part of the problem is he is going, when he goes back to Texas, he is palling around with his old buddies, and they really don't care about anything other than he's the one buying the drinks. And that is a huge problem. You've got to understand that the NFL is a privilege, not a right. And he's got to understand that when you have the starting quarterback position for any team, even the Browns, or the Cleveland Tans, as they probably should be renamed, a mere shadow of their former greatness. You have to act differently. And until you become a champion, you cannot really expect to get a pass on this kind of behavior.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I was saying. I think he's an idiot. He's irresponsible. He goes back to college. He's, allows himself basically to go back into the same environment, which would actually be pretty harmless, except for the fact that, again, as I said before, the role he's in dictates that you can't behave that way.
Yep.
And that's on him. It's not his friends. His friends are behaving exactly the way thousands, hundreds of thousands of normal people at age behave. He's just not recognizing that, unfortunately, if you want the big gig, you want the money, you want the fame, you have to take the responsibility that goes along with it. You can't do what all your buddies have told you.
Absolutely. Do you think he's taken his last snap as a Cleveland Brown?
Who cares?
I agree with you totally.
I'm so sick of this. It just makes me angry every time. Who cares? This guy stinks. He's stunk the entire time we've had him. He has never shown even an iota of potential. And everybody, lives and dies on, whether or not he's behaving, whether or not he has potential, and blah, blah, blah. Who cares? To me, he's just another never was. It doesn't make any difference. I mean, will they cut him? Will they not cut him? I don't know. It doesn't matter. As bad as his decisions are, the Browns are even worse. So
Absolutely. All right, on to the games this weekend, and we're going to start off with the Thursday games. Philadelphia goes to Detroit. That is a pick'em. And anytime you're a pick'em against a 3-7 team, that is never, ever good.
Yeah, although honestly, I was almost surprised this was a pick'em, although not in the way I guess that you're implying there. I can't imagine a way that Philadelphia wins games. It's not much to do with Thanksgiving. I think Detroit and Dallas have both kind of shown that they're vulnerable, even at home, even on a holiday where, traditionally this is their game, so to speak. But, Detroit's been better lately, which is not to say they've been good, and not to say I would, consider them a sort of a viable competitor in most matchups. But against Philly, led by Mark Sanchez, I mean, that's really all you need to say for Mark Sanchez. He could have done this whole game up just by saying that.
Absolutely. The offense, no question, Philadelphia's offense has struggled to get first downs. And with the fast offense that they play, that makes it very, very difficult for the defense to even survive. There's no question that there is a desperate need for any kind of a quarterback in Philadelphia. They need a quarterback that can run, because quarterback runs are critical to getting the running game going. So far, they have a limper and a never was at quarterback, and that's just not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. These guys don't fit in their system. And actually, I would really contend that what they need to do is change the system, which is obviously these two quarterbacks. It wouldn't matter, even in a different system, Sanchez is Sanchez. He's never going to be good. Maybe Bradford fares a little bit better in a slightly different situation, but, he's injured prone, so it kind of doesn't matter. And they're in the quarterback market either way, but they need to change the system. It's what we've been saying since Chip Kelly came into the league. This is not a viable type of offense to use in the NFL. The level of talent required, you can't stack a roster the way that you can in college. And you certainly aren't dealing with over simple, very, very basic defense the way that you are in college. It's just not. You can't run an NFL team this way. It's ridiculous.
Yep, absolutely. In terms of Detroit, change is coming to sweep everybody out, and that could very well include the quarterback.
Yeah, I think so. This is looking more and more all the time like this is going to be house cleaning top to bottom, as it should be. And Stafford, as much as there were very high hopes for him at some point, is probably going to be part of that group as well. A new regime comes in, they're going to want to completely redo this because, let's face it, the whole thing is really a mess. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was one of the casualties as well, even if he's not the biggest problem with that.
Absolutely. On to Carolina, going to Dallas, and that is also a pick'em, which is very interesting. 10-0 versus 3-7, and that gets a pick'em. And I think part of it is, no question, with Romo back, this team is certainly better, but they have always played very, very well on Thanksgiving Day.
except when they play the Browns. There's been some very, very, I'm thinking back to an upset in, I guess it would have been 92 or 93, where when Dallas was very, very good and the Browns were very, very bad. And the Browns went in and beat them on Thanksgiving. So, certainly I think they're very, very beatable on their little holiday game. It happens a fair amount, more than I think anybody really acknowledges. And for the odds makers here, I think this is a strange decision, and we're not even talking about, a game that is with or without Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or somebody of that caliber. And Romo is very good. I like Romo. I certainly, somebody who definitely, I think, respects him as a quarterback very much, but I don't think he's that big of a game changer. It's kind of ridiculous. It's not that a win is out of the realm of possibility here for Dallas, but to set the line like that just because of Tony Romo and completely ignore everything else going on with Dallas feels a little bit silly.
Absolutely. And let's face it, there's no question that the running game has been extremely inconsistent. And when you sign two running backs with bad injury histories, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and they should have known this. I understand they were in a bad situation, and there wasn't a whole lot they could do about Murray. They would probably like to let him go, and there wasn't a whole lot out there on the open market to replace him. But because they're so dependent with Romo being the type of passer that he is on play action, and then the running game has to be working, or he's not going to be able to do his job. And granted, we have this season at least a very small sample size where we have Romo and McFadden in the same game because Romo's been out. But that's got to work. And if McFadden, it's not so much whether he can get it going because he's actually quite good whenever he's out there, but he's got to be able to stay on the field. Otherwise, it's going to take down the whole offense. And let's face it, it's all water under the bridge anyway. They're too far out of it. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah, the only hope is that they are in the NFC least.
I still think with 3 wins, it's a bit of a reach. But, it is possible. It's terrible, when you think about the quality of football for that entire division. But we've got a couple stinkers like that. So.
Absolutely. In terms of Carolina, there's no question that Newton has been very, very good. My question to you is, what happens if he loses a game or two? Does he turn into the bad Newton?
Well, I think that's the big thing that we're all kind of waiting to find out because that's what's happened, every other season. That he really does just fine. In fact, much better than fine, anytime their team is going well. But as soon as they hit, even a small patch of adversity where really, really kind of have to, take a step back and, deal with a loss and bounce back from that, he started to come a little bit unwound after that. And it has a snowball effect because then they can't bounce back after a tough loss and they end up suffering multiple losses because of it. So, I don't know that I'm not convinced that Cam is a new man this season. He's not going to have that problem anymore. I think it's more the opportunity. So we'll see what happens when we get there, because sooner or later they're going to lose. It'll be interesting to see what happens, not in the game they lose, but in the one half.
Absolutely. The key to the defense of Carolina is gang tackling. Those coaches are getting absolutely maximum effort out of every player on D.
This defense has been outstanding, one of the best in the league. Going into the season, we were actually a little bit concerned about it because they had lost a couple guys. Obviously Greg Hardy was gone. Of course, they had some injuries, some concerns as to whether or not this defense was going to be able to deliver on the same level that it's had in previous seasons. And actually, I think they're probably even better. And they're a very well-coached unit as well, which makes a huge difference in, between the level of talent that they have there and sort of the creative defensive play calling that we see there. One of the best defenses in the league, one of the hardest teams out there to score.
Absolutely. Chicago goes to Detroit, or goes to Green Bay. Green Bay is an 8.5-point favorite. Chicago 4-6. Green Bay 7-3. For Chicago, Fox has a ton of work to do to turn this team around, and I truly believe that both Cutler and the offensive line, which have been basically thorns in his side, will not be back next year.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this comes up all the time. Every time we talk about Chicago, and it's because it feels, sort of monumental that Jay Cutler won't be a Bear after next season, which it shouldn't be, considering the way that he performed. But because he was so built up as a prospect, because he has so much potential that's never been real, but it turns into, I think a bigger thing than it should, which, isn't going to mean a whole lot for Chicago down the road. Because I think you're absolutely right. I think Josh Fox is going to work this whole thing out and start over. What's interesting about it is who's going to be the guy who decides to take the chance on Jay Cutler. Somebody is going to do it.
Absolutely. In Chicago, D is for disaster, and that's exactly what the defense has been all year long. This defense couldn't cover a fence post because it would move too fast.
They've just been terrible, and they were pretty bad in previous seasons as well. But they seem to have taken it to a whole new level this season. Certainly not helping out the troubled offense any either, and really no excuse for it either. There have been some injuries, but no more than to any other team. This is just a bad unit, poorly coached, poorly manned, just something that again needs to be blown up and started over, and that really I think throws it into perspective for just how much work the process to do, because really he needs to kind of completely clean it out and get a fresh start on both sides of the ball. That's a very daunting task.
Absolutely. Rodgers for Green Bay has not always been good, and particularly in the 3 losses has been much below average. But the bigger problem is the wide receivers are not getting separation, and boy, does he miss the guys that are injured.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this on Monday when we were kind of wrapping up there, that a lot of the problem was that these guys simply are not able to shake off their coverage. And it's a huge issue because and when you put it together with the fact that the line has not really done an adequate job of giving Rodgers time, it's turned into a situation where, and some of it is Rodgers' fault, as you said. Certainly I think he's part of the problem. He's not had his best season, obviously. But on the whole, I think a lot of the issues that he's had and a lot of the mistakes that maybe appear to be his and maybe are his if you don't look too closely are the result, exactly as you said, of receivers not getting separation and then also some serious problems on the line. And then let's also throw in there the fact that the running game has been wildly inconsistent as well.
Yeah, and no question, Lacey has to get back to that 140, 145-yard level if this team expects to do anything in the postseason.
Yeah, and Lacey had a nice bounce-back game last week, the 100-yard game, which is good. He needed it. Absolutely had to get back to where he was before. Green Bay looked like a very different team when he was able to be effective on the that they've been missing so very long. Take a little of the pressure off of Rodgers in the passing game, particularly with Jordy Nelson out. It's even more important that running game hold up its end of the field.
Absolutely. The defense has been inconsistent. At times they've had a pretty good pass rush, like last week. But at times they are not pass rushing at all.
Yeah, they're just all over the place. It's really, really kind of a dramatic swing from week to week. It's been virtually non-existent in a number of games. It's certainly in those 3 losses that came up. But and then last week, that they actually looked quite good. And then at the beginning of the season as well, I remember you can think back to it, us sort of discussing how we were pleasantly surprised by the Green Bay defense, pleasantly surprised by the amount of pressure they were able to get on opposing quarterbacks. But they haven't been able to do it consistently. And again, it's a little bit like the issue with Eddie Lacy. They're going to reach a point in the playoffs where you can't afford to be up and down like that. You've got to be on every single game. And sooner or later, they're going to hit an off day at exactly the right time.
Absolutely. Oakland goes to Tennessee. Oakland is a 1.5-point favorite. Oakland is 4-6. Tennessee 2-8. Carr has struggled against the pass rush in recent weeks, but that's not a problem because really Tennessee's defense doesn't have one.
Yeah, I don't anticipate this being a particularly difficult game for him. Obviously we all know what his Achilles heel is, that he hates pressure. He really doesn't do well against the pass rush. They're trying really hard out there, I think, to work on getting him better protection, but they're not quite there yet. And, there's also no such thing as perfect protection. And for guys like Carr and like Andy Dalton, who really can't handle any pressure at all, you're never going to be able to put together a line that's good enough to completely wipe that out, especially against a good defense. So, for Oakland, that's going to remain a big issue going forward. But this week against Tennessee, it's not going to matter. They just haven't been able to deliver at all on that front.
Yeah, and another thing that the offensive line has to do, they have to be able to block better for the running game. That Murray has been outstanding when he has not been hit in the backfield consistently, when he's been able to at least get to the line of scrimmage without taking the first hit. But the offensive line has been really up and down, and that's one of the big factors that has led to only 4 wins for Oakland.
Yeah, you keep looking at that win total and thinking it feels like they're better than that. And I think a lot of that is just about potential. This is a team on the rise that you think they should be winning more than they do, and kind of forget that they're not really there yet, despite the fact that a lot of the pieces are in place. But a lot of it is about inconsistency, which is really, I think, very much a hallmark of a young, sort of talented but raw team, which is exactly what Oakland is. That they can't quite, the talent is there to be able to perform at an exceptionally high level, but they can't do it consistently from week to week. They seem to fall off against sort of a variety of opponents, both good and bad. So that's going to be a key this week, too, is that they can't let up just because they're playing a lousy team in Tennessee.
Yeah, really Tennessee, Mariota has struggled like most rookies do at quarterback, but he does not have an awful lot of help. There's not much support there at all in terms of wide receivers or whatever.
Yeah, it's a little hard to judge Mariota's performance at this point. I'm certainly leaning toward the fact that I don't think he's really the right type of passer. I don't know that I think he has the talent to be a true franchise quarterback. But at the same time, I guess we have to withhold judgment because it's impossible for him to achieve, anything that would indicate that he was headed in that direction, even with the people that he has around him. So I guess for Mariota, for now, it's going to be a kind of a wait and see thing.
Yep, absolutely. And the defense has, they are top 6 in total yards, but 18th in points per game. And I think that indicates, again, this inconsistency of a very, very young team.
Yeah, I think so, too. They're just, they can't quite get it together to put a consistent product out on the field week in and week out. And hopefully that'll come, and a lot of that's coaching, too, which is, obviously as a young team, they can't get that to gel overnight. But, good coach will get a team like that to kind of settle in and learn how to be more consistent. So I think that's what we can expect over the next couple of seasons, if not this year.
Absolutely. Buffalo goes to Kansas City. Kansas City is a 4-point favorite. Both teams are 5-5. For Buffalo, Taylor has been solid, but there's no question he was just beaten to a pulp last week. They need to give him more planned runs, but only if he's 100% healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously his biggest asset is the fact that he can run, and that has helped Buffalo tremendously when he was healthy. But I think they need to focus more on doing that as a design play, because rather than just sort of allowing him to make up for the fact that they're been really, really ineffective, outside of basically him on offense. And that's part of the problem, too, is a guy like that who can run, when he's left with no other option, that's exactly what he's going to do. He's trying to win a game. And as a result, he's going to get hit a lot and he's going to get hurt. And good for him for trying to make the most of it, for trying to do everything he can. But, there's going to be a limit to how productive he can be, especially with the injury factor, if they don't get better people around him.
Absolutely. Defensively, it was very interesting last week that Buffalo used an amoeba defense. And by amoeba defense, basically we mean everybody kind of standing up. Some guys were coming and some guys were not. But it really confused the offensive line of New England. And if this continues to work well, I think we're going to see it a lot more.
Yeah, it's actually a really, really interesting strategy. And I think what we have to kind of look at here is, did that work because nobody knew it was coming and it's very hard to deal with if you're not expecting it? Or, is this really truly a sort of a viable defensive formation step? If that's true, then I think there are a lot of upcoming opponents for the Bills who are in trouble. If this was really just a product of, something that the opponent hadn't seen recently or hadn't seen before or what have you, and, give Buffalo some credit, this is really hard to surprise Bill Belichick. So, they did a nice job there, but it'll be interesting to see if this is something that works for them on the regular or if it's something that really they have to kind of keep in their back pocket and only use on occasion.
Of course, Bill Belichick used the amoeba defense several years ago and had basically both outside linebackers and his 4 defensive linemen all standing up at the snap, kind of wandering around with no particular place to go. And you would have thought that he would have been much more prepared for something like that. But it did work well. For 3 quarters, it kept the scoring of New England way below their average.
Yeah, so that's certainly something I think that's for Buffalo, obviously team with a long way to go. Really not a whole lot going for it other than the defense. But, I think they've shown they can be versatile on defense and that they can sort of adjust what they're doing to the opponent, to the element of surprise and so on and so forth. So, at least even though they have so many other problems, it's nice to see them really get something.
Yeah, and for Kansas City, Smith without running back Charles is kind of like a peanut butter sandwich without the peanut butter or the bread.
Yeah, this offense just doesn't function without Jamal Charles because he was the entire offense. Alex Smith, I think, is one of those guys who can perform adequately in a perfect situation. When everything else around him is exactly as it should be, he tends to not make mistakes. But he doesn't have the physical talent, and it's starting to look like he's maybe strategically not as good as we thought he was either in that regard. So without a running game there, it doesn't matter. They're completely ineffective.
Well, and they've got to rethink that because, let's face it, Charles is not a big guy, and he's now been hurt in 2 of the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, I don't particularly like Charles. I'm sure he's a very nice person, and he's certainly very talented, but to me, he's very overvalued because he can't stay healthy, which is not necessarily his fault. It's not a knock on him necessarily. It's more about what his true potential is, and that I think, and most importantly, in terms of overvaluing him, I think the problem is that the Kansas City is overvalued. And they put way too much stock in the fact that Jamal Charles has been available out, and that's not fair to him. Because he's being asked to do something he simply can do at his size, really at anybody's size, and we're passing him alongside it. So it's been put in an impossible situation. He's been, I think, set up in a position where he can't possibly live up to the expectations. It's too bad.
Yeah, and Kansas City is down to their 3rd running back. Spencer Ware is replacing the injured West after he was hurt and after Charles was hurt. So they're down, way down, and that's going to be really, really hard to run up against the Buffalo defense because Buffalo expects to get Kyle Williams, the defensive tackle, back. And if he's back, that's going to make it really hard for Kansas City to run against him.
Yeah, I almost can't believe that anybody thinks Kansas City is likely to win this game. I just don't see how it's possible. Even if Buffalo's offense can't get anything going, I just don't see any way that Kansas City offense has even a shred of a chance to be effective against that Buffalo defense, especially, as you said, with Kyle Williams.
Winston, Tampa Bay goes to Indianapolis. The point spread is Indy -3. Both teams are 5-5. Winston has been good the last few weeks, but I don't think it's quite time to try to put a gold jacket on him.
Oh, yeah, I'm not even sure. I think it's time to say I think he's a viable starter. But certainly I think he's gotten better, and that's a good sign that most of his poor performances came at the beginning, and he's getting better. That's I think a sign that as a rookie he's progressing, that he's learning the game at the NFL level. He's sort of starting to adapt to it, adjust his own game, and as a result he's playing better. But it's such a small sample size, and again, we always have to go back to the issue that he has to stay out of trouble. There were just too many instances leading up to his NFL career to where we can shake it that quickly. Although, to his credit, so far that we know of, there haven't been any problems since the NFL.
Yeah, at least he hasn't stolen any crab legs recently.
Yeah, he's been pretty good. And more importantly, he stayed out of serious trouble, which is the big thing. And those are, that's stuff I think that he's still legally wrapped up in. So that's another problem, too, is that the stuff that he did when he was in college is actually still pending in terms of being a legal matter. He is being sued for the girl who he allegedly attacked. So, he's not even clear of that yet.
Yeah, the defense has been pretty decent. It is 26th in points allowed. Really, the only 2 guys that are outstanding are the defensive tackle McCoy and the outside linebacker David. Other than that, they are pretty much bereft of really top defensive players on the D.
Yeah, this just isn't a particularly talented group. They don't have enough people, and maybe most importantly, they don't have the right people, I think, to run the team that Lovie would like to there, which is not his fault. But it's what he has to work with. Unfortunately, it's not enough in terms of talent, and it's not really the right type of people anyway. So, if he's going to get a chance to put together the type of defense that I know he wants to, it's going to take some more time, and they're going to have to draft better because they have a long way to go. So few guys there who are really tricky.
Absolutely. Indianapolis, Hasselbeck is in. We have not seen Luck at all. He is still injured. And the recently the running game has been just horrendous, and even more horrendous has been the offensive line. Hasselbeck is what, 193 years old? He's going to need protection.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly I think that, take a cue from a guy like Andrew Luck, who's much younger, certainly in the prime of his career, and is a pretty tough guy, can take a pretty good beating. And look where he is now. He has a lacerated kidney, which is only the most recent in a long string of the type of injuries that you get when you're not getting adequate protection and you're getting the tar beat out of you during the game. And, then Hasselbeck is who's a pretty tough guy in his own right, even for his age. But he's a lot older, certainly nowhere near the prime of his career. And as a backup, he is pretty good. But, he's going to need some help in that line if it's going to be tough.
Yeah, the Indianapolis defense has been a disaster as well. Yep. They are 19th in points allowed, but have been a lot worse than that in terms of giving up critical drives and critical points toward the end of games, and that's why they're 5-5.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we have to consider, too, I think the fact that those point totals are skewed low because they play in a bad division.
Yep.
So, they're facing off against a lot of teams that simply can't score. So that, I think, skewed a little bit more favorably even than it should be. This defense is just awful. They're not the worst in the league, but they are close.
Absolutely. And there's still a number of players that still have pockmarks on their faces from the cleats of the New England Patriots in the last playoff game.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. The Giants go to Washington. Giants -2.5. Giants are 5-5. Washington is 4-6. Eli has been consistent, and the offense is fourth in scoring, but he is doing it on his own because there has been absolutely no run game whatsoever.
This has been a problem for them from the get-go, right from the start of the season. Everybody knew it was going to be a problem going in. They haven't really even done anything to attempt to fix it, which I think is mostly speaks to the fact they simply don't have anybody to fill the role. They just can't get anything going there. And, luckily, I think their passing game has been pretty good, has done, a nice job of kind of making up for that. But it's not enough, which is why they are where they are. And, defensively, obviously, they have problems as well. So, it's nice to see Eli doing well, certainly earning his contract. Unfortunately, there just isn't anybody else out there, really, other than maybe some of his receivers, who's holding up their end of the field.
Absolutely. And it doesn't help that the defense ranks 32nd against the pass. Again, this is another group that couldn't cover a fence post.
They're just absolutely terrible. You don't think of them this way because they're 5-5, I believe, and not certainly far from the worst team in the league, but they might actually be the worst defense in the league.
Absolutely. Washington, Cousins has been just barely decent. 15 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and the run game has gone totally south. I don't understand why this team doesn't understand that running the ball is their best offense because they don't have any quarterbacks on this roster.
Yeah, Washington is like talking about the Browns.
Yep.
There's sort of almost no point to even trying to figure it out because consistently their decision-making has been awful. The things they do don't make sense. Even when they have the opportunity to help themselves, they don't do it. It's sort of like this endless exercise in frustration. They just can't seem to figure it out. Even if somebody holds up a giant sign in front of them telling them exactly what to do, they still aren't going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the defense has not helped at all. It is 25th in terms of points allowed per game, 30th against the run. This team is just a total dumpster fire on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, they're a horrible team. I mean, there's a couple of teams in the league, luckily not too many, where, you just shake your head and go, why is this allowed to go on? Why hasn't the ownership group, and of course, I think, there's your answer right there, is that the problem goes all the way to the top. It's true in Washington, it's true in Cleveland, just bad ownership group that breeds, bad personnel decisions from the top down, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it unless somebody wants to sell the team.
Yep. New Orleans goes to Houston. Houston is -3 in terms of point spread. New Orleans 4-6, Houston 5-5. Despite the fire sale on the offensive side of the ball, that really hasn't been a problem. They are 8th in scoring and 3rd in yards, 2nd in passing yards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you got to give Drew Brees credit for that. Forced, he sort of tried to make something out of nothing, figured it out. Even though they effectively gave away all of his weapons, still obviously Jimmy Graham is fine, still finds a way to score points, to move the ball down the field, even at his age without any weapons. It's kind of incredible. Certainly, I think a testament to him. Unfortunately, their defense is a disaster, and that's where I think it almost doesn't matter what Brees does at this point.
Yeah, the defense is absolutely a disaster. It is last in points per game, last in yards, 31st in pass yards given up, and 29th against the run. That is why Ryan got fired. Do you really think that maybe the new DC, Allen, can turn this thing around at all?
No.
No. Okay. Very succinct. Houston is going to have Brian Hoyer as the starter again. And the problem for Brian is he has no offensive line, no running game. Other than that, he's in good shape.
Yeah, I think that's selling the Houston offense a little bit short. They have trouble scoring points, but certainly when Hoyer's been in there, they've been a little bit better than that. And against the New Orleans defense, I actually think they're going to be just fine. I think what we end up seeing here is really, it'll be obviously all passing on both sides, both for New Orleans and for Houston. The run games have not looked good, especially in Houston, of course, because of injuries. So it's probably going to come down to who outscores who.
Yeah, absolutely. And the defense has not been as good as they were anticipated to be. They're 15th in terms of scoring per game, 20th against the run.
This has been an overhyped defense for a really, really long time. Everybody sees J.J. Watt. He's the best defensive player in the league. There's no doubt about that. But, there's this tendency, I think, to look at Watt and assume that means this must be a good defense. And it doesn't take anything away from how well he plays. But as we've said over and over and over again, one guy cannot possibly be an entire defense, which, we've explained why as well. But, the big thing there, I think, for them is that they've been a little bit better over the last couple of games, which I think is encouraging. I think they found a couple of ways around to use Watt more effectively to kind of not allow teams to double and triple team them as much as they have. But the problem is going to remain. They have to build more depth there. They can't keep going it alone and just saying, well, we have J.J. Watt, so everything's fine. It's just this fun.
Yep, absolutely. Minnesota goes to Atlanta. Atlanta -2 is the point spread. There's no question that the Vikings took a very hard loss last week. And the offensive line let Green Bay sack Bridgewater 6 times and held Peterson to 45 yards on 13 attempts. That cannot happen. That offensive line has to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, Bridgewater and Peterson, they were doing their jobs. They weren't the problem. This wasn't a case of inconsistency or a bad game for those guys. It was the fact that the people around them were not protecting them, not giving them the blocking, not giving them the insulation that they needed. Bridgewater just got the daylight out of him by a defense that's not been great, quite frankly, for a lot of the season. So that should tell you something right there. And Peterson was rendered ineffective as well. So their line has to step it up if they want to stay in the mix as a serial.
Absolutely. And the defense, the Minnesota defense has really been pretty decent. They are third in points allowed, and at just 18.4 points per game, at just 0.2 points behind New England, who is first. This has really been an underreported story of this Minnesota 7-3 start.
Yeah, their defense has done well. They've also gotten better since the beginning of the season. At the beginning of the year, they were good but not great. But they've improved greatly on that. Every week they seem to get better. Obviously, they had a little bit of a hiccup last week, but it was not a terrible performance for them, even against Green Bay. So on the whole, they've been very good. If I'm them, I count myself lucky that nobody's paying attention because it never, ever hurts you to be underestimated. So if I'm Minnesota, I'm going to take advantage of that as long as I can.
Absolutely. Atlanta's offense has fallen and it can't get up. And the problem has been more on the offensive side than the defensive side. No question that Ryan needs more help. He needs to get his running game back. And at one time early in the season when they were 6-0, they had a really good running game. That has kind of disappeared. They've had some injuries on the offensive line, but this offense needs to crank it up because I think, frankly, the defense is probably good enough to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think so too. Their defense, it's not perfect, but it's fine. It's plenty good enough, and it should be more than good enough considering what that offense ought to be able to do and what we've seen it do. What we saw it do for the first 6 weeks of the season, really. But a lot of that's the running game again. We keep sort of talking about, and we've talked in seasons past about how part of the problem with, Matt Ryan and that receiver group is that while they're very, very talented, that they can't be as effective as they need to be without a running game accompanying that. And that's always been a problem for them. It looked like they finally fixed it this year for a couple of games. Then the injuries kicked in, and it's like we're right back where we were last year and the year before that.
Yeah, and the reason that they can't survive the way that a New England survives is they don't have the kind of offensive line that is number one pass blocking type lineman. And as a result, when you are pass only, the defense is just going to put their ears back and they are going to blitz and blitz and blitz. And when they do that, Ryan can't be effective. The wide receivers don't have time to get open. That is what has been the downfall of this Atlanta team, and why, unlike some other teams that can survive being one-dimensional in terms of their offense, Atlanta really can't until they turn over their offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned New England, Green Bay, I think that for the most part has been a good example of that as well, that they've been able to survive on that, and New Orleans was for a very long time as well. But, I think for Atlanta, it's shaking out more like Indianapolis has in the past. Obviously Indianapolis is just bad, but, the last couple of years, they've been able to survive very much completely on their passing game, but the line didn't hold up ultimately in the end. They didn't have any running game, and it didn't matter how good Andrew Luck was. It didn't matter how good his receivers were. They were doomed by the time they got into the playoffs, and I think for Atlanta, it's something very similar to happened earlier.
Absolutely. St. Louis goes to Cincinnati. Cincinnati is an 8.5-point favorite. The Rams are 4-6. The Bengals are 8-2. There's no question that the trade for Foles has been a disaster. The only good part is that St. Louis offensively ranks 31st in scoring offense. The only good news is that, Bradford was benched too.
Yeah, I guess that does sort of neutralize the issues of the trade a little bit. Mostly I think it kind of doesn't matter either way. Both of those teams were in a situation where they had to try something because what they had in-house was definitely not going to work. So, I don't know that I'd really even consider this a bad trade because it's not like either one of them's any worse off. They're just not any better off. And they didn't really give up much to get to the situation that they were in, although I'm sure they're a little bit bummed out because obviously, Foles, of the two of them, was the one who was sort of more of an unknown, who they thought, perhaps he'll be different, perhaps he'll be better here. Turns out that's not the case. He's just been absolutely awful. I think they're ready to move on. I think with somebody new.
I think they're going to definitely move on. The defense has been good, but not as good as expected. It ranks only 10th in points per game at 19.9.
Yeah, and I think, again, and every week we talk about this with St. Louis, the problem is that they play down to their opponent.
Yep.
So every time they play a bad team, that defense starts to look a little bit lazy. It's not that they're bad, not by any stretch. This is still a better than average defense, but not nearly as good as they should be or as they were, rumored to be or what have you, because they have terribly, terribly inconsistent tendency to very, very often, really, really kind of allow their game to weaken and to lose aggressiveness when they play against a lesser opponent.
Well, and also that's kind of what happens when you put all of your eggs in the front four. They have five first-round picks in that front four. But the problem is the linebacker group is not as strong as the front four, and the defensive back group has just been horrendous. And that's really what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket. And there's no question that Donald, the defensive tackle for the Rams, is one of the best defensive tackles, and he's only in his rookie year. He is one of the best defensive tackles in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do. You know, you can see when you don't have any balance on your defense. You know, Kansas City has a little bit of the same problem. Baltimore certainly has some of the same problems. You know, they're very good fronts, but terrible in backfield. It's just, you know, really, really goes to show you that, you know, you have to spread it around a little bit. You know, obviously it's very, very appealing, especially when you're talking about a defensive-minded group that has been fortunate enough to sort of get some pretty serious talent in one particular position group together. It's so tempting to just flush that out and say, okay, well, we're going to put together the best front four out there. But the problem is that if you spend all your money that way, you know, sometimes you have to compromise a little bit on that and say, hey, these guys are so good that they can get it done, and toss something in another direction. Otherwise, you have all these holes all over the field. It's not very hard for an opposing offense to figure out how they can avoid it and beat you another way.
Absolutely. The big question in Cincinnati is, can Cincinnati come back from 2 straight losses? I think the defense can, but I wonder about the psyche of Dalton.
Yeah, you know, on one hand, we look at this as, well, it's not a primetime game. You know, it's not a playoff game. It's certainly not a must-win for them in any way, although they do need to watch their backs because Pittsburgh's coming. But, you know, it's not a critical game in that sense, and it's, you know, not being played at night. So all of those things would speak to the idea that they'll be fine, that Dalton will be fine. But at the same time, you know, the root of that is that he doesn't handle pressure well psychologically. And losing 2 in a row is going to put you in a similar mindset, even if it's never really manifested specifically before. So it's still something I think you have to look out for. You know, I don't know. You know, I want to say I think Cincinnati will have no trouble at all with St. Louis this week. But this is Andy Dalton. They've lost 2 games in a row. You just never know.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you look at the defense or the offense against Houston 2 weeks ago, they scored just 6 points. Last week's 31 points against a really pretty good Arizona defense was much better. But this is absolutely a critical question, and they're going to be in trouble if they can't get Dalton's head screwed on straight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's probably not even a point of discussion because we all know what's going to happen in that first playoff game. You know, it's like we can talk about hypotheticals if Dalton keeps it together, if they figure out a way to. It's not going to happen. There have been so many opportunities for him to show that he's finally gotten past that. He's not. He's never going to. End of story.
Absolutely. San Diego goes to Jacksonville. The point spread is Jacksonville -4. No question, San Diego is 2-8, Jacksonville 4-6. There's no question that the offensive line and the defense have already mentally moved to Los Angeles. Rivers is expected to win games absolutely on his own, and that's why they have just 2 wins.
Yeah, you know, they've just been terrible, and it's kind of shocking in some ways. You know, this team should. I think we all kind of expected that they were going to struggle, and especially considering the fact that they're moving. You know, we've talked a lot about the psychological effect of what that does to a team, and its likely final year or you know, penultimate year in it's the city that it's leaving. But I don't think any of us expected them to really be this bad, and they have just been awful. And some of that's injuries, certainly, but that's not enough to explain this. We've got guys underachieving, you know, it's terrible front office decisions, terrible coaching decisions, just a total lack of talent. You know, other than Phillips Rivers, this is a team you look at it and go, everything is wrong.
Absolutely. And a real indication is Rivers is second in pass yards, but the team is 22nd in points per game. That's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of makes the whole thing feel like just this exercise in futility, which I'm sure is exactly how Philip Rivers feels. And he can, you know, he's pretty consistently, I think, move the ball down the field over and over again without problem. You know, certainly racking up the numbers to support that, but then they can't see for it's got to be so far.
And I think the entire coaching staff, I think everybody is gone. I would not be at all surprised to see Rivers maybe on the trading block for a blockbuster deal with one of the teams that is in the top 3 or 4 in terms of draft picks.
Yeah, I would think so as well. I think that because they're going to be doing their house cleaning there, and because certainly I think Rivers doesn't have a whole lot of motivation to stay. We talked about the fact that we thought they treated him kind of badly over the years, that they did give him that deal, but they really jerked him around on the way there, and they haven't given him any help. I doubt he would be in any way opposed to going somewhere else, which just makes it all that the more easier for them to do that. And, the way that the contract is structured, what they could do there, I think would be very, very attractive to another team, basically a quarterback away from contention, who maybe has a draft pick that would be sort of something that San Diego could use to rebuild in their new location.
Absolutely. Miami goes to the Jets. The Jets are 3.5-point favorites. Miami 4-6. The Jets are 5-5. Tannehill for Miami got franchise money, but has yet to produce any kind of franchise offense. He's 21st in passing yards and has thrown 17 touchdowns, 10 picks.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very mediocre quarterback. I don't think there's any getting around it. I think that's just who he is. He's not bad. He's not good. He's just okay. He's really inconsistent. I've never seen him ever play a single game where I thought he was dominant and convincing as a franchise quarterback. I've seen him play plenty of games where I thought he did fine, but I've never once seen him turn in a performance where I said, there it is. And you need a lot more than one if you're going to pay somebody like they're going to deliver that, and we haven't seen that at all out of him, so I think they made a mistake.
Well, when his college had him playing wide receiver rather than quarterback, that should have been a huge marker to the NFL. Be careful of this guy, because we have seen quarterbacks that were quarterbacks in college play wide receivers in the NFL. But I don't think we've ever seen a successful wide receiver as a quarterback in the NFL, and particularly not an NFL franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I think this is just a case of somebody who, it's not so much that Miami looked at him and thought he was some terribly, terribly wonderful thing. It's more about the fact that there's really a shortage of talent at the position, that he's the guy they've got. They felt like he was good enough. They're hoping he'll get better, so they took a chance. Unfortunately, I think it was not a good risk to take, because he's actually not getting better. And he really hasn't at all since his first season. I just don't think he's improving. I don't think he's really cut out for the job. He's never going to be the worst guy in the league. He's never going to be the first guy, who you're going to call for to be benched or what have you. But he's just never going to be as good.
Yep. The Jets need a quarterback, any quarterback. It is 14th in points per game, but that's primarily because of a running game that has really been pretty consistent as long as Ivory is healthy. The pass game is 19th. They have two quarterbacks, but the combined quarterbacks have 18 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. This is not a good offensive team, other than a pretty decent running back, as long as Ivory can stay healthy.
Yeah, I think, to me, they couldn't do it quick enough. They did a nice job of building their defense. But you can't completely blow up the team and start over in one off season. Obviously, they just really couldn't get the offense. They prioritized defense. It worked pretty well for them. Maybe, I think, not as well as we thought it was going to, but good enough. And they'll get there on that side of the ball. But obviously, they have a lot of work to do with offense, and that's where starts for that.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Arizona goes to San Francisco. Arizona -10 is the point spread. Arizona is 8-2. The 49ers are 3-7. Palmer has been spectacular, 27 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. And Arizona is first in points per game and also first in yards per game. And the defense has really been very solid as well. They're 13th in points per game, only third in yards per game given up. The losses have really been primarily on the D not being able to stop that critical drive. And they've had two critical drives that they have not been able to stop.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to is, the two lots they did have were close games. They were decided late in the game. Just a critical situation where they just couldn't hold up any longer. And that's, I think, not really an immediate concern for them. As long as Palmer stays healthy, they're not going to have a problem. But, when you get deep into the playoffs, when all the games are close, and you expect kind of opponents that's not going to quit fighting right until the end, even if you've taken a lead on them. That's where I think that we have to be a little bit worried. Is this group going to be able to hold up? Can they hang on for 4 full quarters?
Absolutely. For San Francisco, the offense died and was buried last week against Seattle. It's 32nd in points per game, 13.9 points, 30th in yards. I mean, this offense is just horrendous. And it hasn't made any difference who you put in at quarterback because, frankly, that offensive line is one of the 2 or 3 worst in the NFL.
Yeah, obviously, as we keep seeing, the benching of Kaepernick was just punitive. But really, he didn't have a prayer. Neither did Gabbard. In Gabbard's defense, it's not like he has a fighting chance of being able to do anything with this group. It's just absolutely terrible. They have no protection. You can't possibly hope to be able to accomplish anything. Even with somebody who's more consistent than Kaepernick or certainly more talented than Gabbard, it's not going to matter until they get these guys in protection, until they get a defense, until they get, they need a lot of things. It's not going to make a lick of difference.
Yep. Pittsburgh goes to Seattle. It is Seattle minus 3.5. Pittsburgh is 4-6. Seattle 5-5. Pittsburgh is 2.5 games behind Cincinnati. Now they are on the hunt, particularly if Cincinnati loses earlier in the day. This is going to be a really interesting race. The offense has really been pretty decent. It's 12th in terms of points per game at 23.6, despite Roethlisberger not having either Roethlisberger or Bell, and Bell has been out for most of the season. This is really a whole new version of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
You got to hand it to them. They've done a really, really good job of keeping it together, despite losing quite frankly, their 2 most important players. Options. They really, really, I think, have done a nice job of adapting, of sort of retailoring that offense to fit different people, of finding ways to win. And that's the only reason they're still in, because, Bell obviously has been out, as you said, for most of the season. Roethlisberger was out for a significant amount of chunk. That they hadn't been able to do that, undoubtedly would have bounced up completely. So, a lot of credit certainly to the coaching staff there in Pittsburgh for kind of finding a way to stay in the mix because, 2.5 games is going to be tough to make up behind Cincinnati there. But because Cincinnati does what it does, or I should say Andy Dalton does what he does, under pressure, the closer Pittsburgh gets, I think the worse Cincinnati's going to play, which makes sort of for an interesting situation where if Pittsburgh just gets a foot a little further in the door, they're probably going to be able to kick it down.
I think so too, absolutely. And the defense has really played much better than expected. They are 6th in points per game given up at 19.1, 5th against the run. This has really been a great improvement on the defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we weren't expecting it, or at least we weren't expecting this quickly. They've been obviously just a shadow of what they once were the last couple of years, essentially, a team that had always prided itself on it, and that being the strength of the team, and they were just absolutely awful. The last couple of seasons really, really couldn't get anything going. Very inconsistent, not performing in any way the way you think of the Steelers' defenses. But I think they've really, really stepped it up this season. I think they've done a really nice job. I thought they turned it around pretty quickly, and they're going to continue to get better.
Yep, absolutely. Seattle, no question, before the season even started, we predicted that Seattle could very well fail to get to the playoffs unless they fix that horrible offensive line. They've tried a lot of different combinations. Quite frankly, nothing has worked. Wilson has, despite the lack of offensive line and lack of weapons overall, has gotten the lead in every single game that he has started in, but the defense has given away 5 losses, 5 critical drives at the end of the game to lose games. I think Seattle has to win 5 of the last 6 in order to make the playoffs.
Yeah, and they're not going to. I think a couple of weeks ago they sort of effectively put themselves out of contention. They just jumped, despite the tremendous amount of talent in some positions, they've been so inconsistent in others, and I think it's very telling. We've, for probably, I'd say the last 6 shows, we've brought this up, talked about the fact that it's not just that line. It's also the fact that that defense is giving up points to critical situations. The offense goes out to lead, and then the defense gets up. This is not anything like the defense we saw in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I think they're, certainly I think a team that's still one to watch for the future. I think they'll bounce back from this, but for this season, I think they're kind of done.
Yep, absolutely. New England goes to Denver. New England's a 3-point favorite. New England 10-0, Denver 8-2. The Pats are perfect, and with Osweiler at quarterback, that's probably not going to change. With Osweiler playing for Denver, that's not likely to change this week at all.
Yeah, that's my guess as well. I'm not sure with the mangled Peyton Manning, their chances of getting better. But, either way, I think, once you got Osweiler out there, I think you have to concede that, the New England defense is actually, I think, better than anybody expected and certainly better than advertised as well. And their offense, continues to do what they do. This is a team that, even with the loss of Julian Edelman, it's okay, fine, and we'll just use Amendola. And then when Amendola, had some issues with the knee, brought in an undrafted rookie who also did just fine. So they're so good at adapting. They have so much depth. I don't think there's going to be any issue here at all for them. I don't even think this is going to be close.
Absolutely. The defense for New England has been interesting. They are 15th in yards per game given up, but they are first in points per game. Basically, what they do is force every team to basically kick field goals rather than scoring touchdowns.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it comes down to, really, is that they've been outstanding at keeping your opponent out of the end zone. They will allow them to drive up the field, which is obviously not ideal, but, it's worked out okay for them because they are just very, very stingy when it comes to allowing people to go get that touchdown, force everybody to kick field goals. And when you have an offense like New England, you don't care if every single time your opponent comes down the field, they get a field goal, you're going to be able to outscore them. It's just math.
Yep, absolutely. In terms of Denver, let's face it, the running game has rolled over and stuck its little feet up in the air. Denver is 27th in rush yards per game offensively.
Yeah, add that to their long list of problems, and there are many, many problems there. They really never got their run game going at all this season. Really been a problem, even when Peyton Manning, had a couple of games where he actually looked all right before he really, really started to kind of fall apart, and the injuries became more and more apparent. But, even before that, they just couldn't get anything going on the ground. It really, really had a rough time. I think we saw maybe one game where I thought they had a nice rushing total coming out of it. It's really just been bad.
Yep, absolutely. The defense, let's face it, has kept Denver in the playoff contention, ranking second in points per game, first in yards, and first against the pass.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the only reason they're still even in the conversation. And, even that, I think a lot of it is about the fact that while their strength schedule should have been pretty good, it hasn't been. I think that they've had a couple of tough games that they had to go out there and face up against, but they've also had some pretty easy ones there, at least the kind of games that makes your defense better than it is. And while this defense has been overrated for years, and this is the first season where they've really delivered and actually contributed, I still think they're not as good as they need to be. Certainly not good enough to carry a team. This offense is just absolutely crippled by the loss of Peyton Manning.
Absolutely. That brings us to the Monday night game, which ESPN wants its money back from the NFL for. It's Baltimore 3-7 at Cleveland 2-8. And when was the last time that you saw Cleveland a 2.5-point favorite?
Yeah, it's kind of stunning. And, obviously when we preview this game on Monday, we'll get into this in a little more detail. But it's frightening. First of all, you look at this and you shake your head and go, who thought this was a good idea for a Monday night game? Even when you thought Baltimore was going to be good, there's still the Cleveland factor. And now it's even worse. I mean, it's like bottom of the barrel bad because Cleveland is now the favorite. It's just awful. I mean, I feel like, this is one of those things where you just shake your head and say, see, here's another one of those things where Cleveland is going to have to apologize to the entire country for inflicting it on a national television audience.
Absolutely. And it could very well be ugly football. No question about it. With the third string or the second string quarterback in for Baltimore, it just could really be ugly. But we'll get into that on Monday's show. All right. Any final thoughts on this weekend's games?
Have a happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I hope everybody enjoys the holiday. Enjoy the fact that there's football on all day long, basically. Perhaps not the best matchups of the week, but the good news is that even after the holiday's over, I think we have some really, really excellent matchups coming this Sunday. Maybe not the Thanksgiving games, but on Sunday, a lot of really, really interesting ones to watch. Should be a good weekend of football.
Absolutely. Now, I've got some news. Nobody else realizes this, but Harbaugh was up in Upper Peninsula, and he was driving along the freeway and had a flat tire, and it was right near the lake. And he got out and came around the edge and slipped off the edge of the cliff. And he's holding on, and he says, "God, help me, God, I'm going to fall." And the Lord says, "Let go." And he said, "I can't let go. I'll be crushed on the rocks below." And finally, he gets down to his fingernails, and he says, "Lord, I'm going to do it. I'm going to let go." And he pushes away, and just as he clears the edge of the rock, the Lord says, "Go Bucks."
Oh, you Ohio State fan.
All right.
I guess as a Penn Stater, I'm sort of outside the orbit of this weekend's festivities. So.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, everybody have a wonderful holiday. Certainly have a great Turkey Day and enjoy the games. We will be back on Monday to let you know what has happened and also, of course, obviously preview the Browns and the Ratbirds. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. You guys are why we do this 2-3 times a week, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Samantha, the best to you, and have a great Turkey Day, too.
Thank you. You, too. I hope you and your family really, really enjoy your day tomorrow.
We'll talk to you later. Take care, and again, happy Thanksgiving. Bye now.